That day, the sky above the military base was clear. Jungkook, who had just been transferred to the Tactics and Survival Division, strode excitedly to his new training ground. However, no one expected that day to be one of the toughest days of his life. The Tactics Division's trainer, Lieutenant Han, was known for being strict and not tolerating any mistakes. He had a reputation as a trainer who always demanded the best from his soldiers. When Jungkook reported as a new recruit, Lieutenant Han's sharp gaze immediately greeted him. The day's training began with a 10-kilometer run through challenging hilly terrain. The cool morning air turned sultry as the sun began to climb the sky, heating up the rocky ground and sandy trails they ran on. Jungkook, although used to strenuous exercise since before entering the military, felt a different challenge this time. His military boots felt heavy, like bricks clinging to his feet. Each step on the uneven ground tested his balance and strength. The backpack full of equipment on his back added pressure to his shoulders and lower back, as if every step was pulling him back to the ground. Every drop of sweat running down his temples felt like his body's tears begging for rest, but Jungkook ignored them. Up ahead, he saw his division mates running in a steady rhythm. They looked like tireless machines, their feet planted firmly on the ground while their breathing remained steady. On the other hand, some of the guys behind him began to slow down, the sound of heavy breathing and backpacks rubbing against their bodies. Jungkook turned to them and felt the urge to keep going, even though his legs were starting to feel like they were going to give out. The hilly path not only tested them physically, but also mentally. There were times when they had to climb up a steep incline slippery with small pebbles, then down a narrow valley filled with tree roots. Jungkook almost fell when his foot caught on a root, but he managed to keep his balance. A partner next to him, named Miho, offered a brief boost by pushing his back. When they reached the 5-kilometer mark, Lieutenant Han stood atop a small hill, watching them with a sharp gaze. "Hurry up! If you guys can't finish this in time, you'll be adding another 2 kilometers to the distance," he shouted. His voice echoed through the trees, making them all even more tense. Jungkook felt the urge to quicken his pace. His breath was getting shallow, his heartbeat was pounding in his chest, and every step was getting harder. However, he kept reminding himself that this was a test he had to pass. Every pain is part of the process of becoming stronger. On the last climb before the finish line, the route became even steeper. The rocky ground made each step more difficult, and the backpack on his back felt like an impossible weight to bear. Jungkook saw some of the guys ahead of him start to slow down. Miho, who had been pushing him forward, now looked exhausted. Without hesitation, Jungkook approached him. "Come on, Miho. You encouraged me earlier. Now it's my turn," he said, patting Miho on the back. They both supported each other, with Jungkook pushing Miho from behind. Slowly but surely, they made it through the final climb together. When they finally reached the finish line, Jungkook almost fell to the ground from exhaustion. However, he held himself up, standing tall while catching his breath. Lieutenant Han stood not far away, checking their time with a stopwatch in hand. Jungkook said nothing, but in his heart, he knew that he had passed one of the toughest tests of his life. Although his body was tired, there was a sense of pride slowly growing in his chest. He knew that he had given his best, not only for himself but also for his team. However, he is also aware that this is just the beginning. He still had a long way to go in the Tactics Division, and even tougher challenges awaited him. With renewed vigor, Jungkook vowed in his heart to persevere, fight, and get better. When the session was over, Lieutenant Han ordered them to immediately head to the tactics training area. There, Jungkook and his team were given the task of completing a hostage rescue simulation. However, while executing the tactics, Jungkook accidentally broke protocol by speaking too loudly, which was deemed to jeopardize the operation. As punishment for his mistake, Jungkook was ordered to do 100 push-ups under the burning sun. The sun was directly overhead, and the heat was intense on his skin, even penetrating the military uniform he was wearing. Jungkook dropped his body to the dusty ground, ready to start. When Jungkook reached 50, his body began to tremble. The heat from the ground seemed to penetrate his palms. Every muscle in his body began to scream, begging for rest, but he knew he couldn't stop. Lieutenant Han stood not far from him, watching with a sharp gaze. "Don't stop until you finish. If you stop, you're starting over," exclaimed Lieutenant Han. "Ready, Pack," Jungkook replied without hesitation, despite his labored breathing. When he finally finished 100 push-ups, his body felt like it was going to collapse. But the law: grab your backpack. Run around the field 5 laps with that 20-kilogram backpack, ordered Lieutenant Han, his voice leaving no room for argument. Jungkook immediately stood up even though his legs felt weak. He grabbed the backpack that was placed nearby and lifted it onto his back. The weight of the backpack felt like a small mountain crushing his shoulders, but Jungkook did not show any complaint. The first steps were heavy, but he forced his legs to move. Dust flew every time his shoes hit the ground, mixing with the sweat that ran down his face. His breathing began to get irregular as he completed the first lap, but he refused to slow down. On the second lap, his body began to rebel. His shoulders felt hot, like they were burning under the weight of the backpack, and his lungs couldn't seem to get enough air. However, there was only one thought in his mind. Asterisk, I can't stop. I have to finish this asterisk. On the third lap, some of his teammates began to give small cheers to encourage him. "Come on, Jungkook, you can do it," one of them shouted. The voice gave Jungkook a little energy. He caught his breath, trying to adjust his running rhythm to be more stable. Even though his legs started to feel like lead, he kept going. The fourth lap felt like hell. His legs began to shake, and every step felt like dragging himself over broken glass. But Jungkook refused to give up. He gritted his teeth, focusing his gaze ahead, to the line that marked the end of the course. On the fifth lap, he almost stumbled, but quickly steadied himself. Lieutenant Han stood near the finish line, watching with an unpredictable expression. Jungkook used the last of his strength to run a little faster in the final seconds. When he finally crossed the line, his body immediately fell to the ground. Lieutenant Han approached, then stood over him. "Get up, soldier," he ordered. With difficulty, Jungkook pushed himself up, though his breathing was still labored. "You finished your punishment, but remember this well. Mistakes on the training field may only lead to punishment, but mistakes on the battlefield will cost your team their lives. Don't repeat your mistake again," Lieutenant Han said in a stern tone. That day, Jungkook learned that punishment wasn't just physical torture. It was a valuable lesson, a reminder that in the military, every action has consequences. And though his body was tired, he knew that he was mentally stronger than ever. Though tired and his knees were about to give out, Jungkook didn't complain. He knew that this was part of the process of shaping himself as a tough soldier. Sweat poured down his face, but he persevered. That night, after the training was over, one of his seniors, Sergeant Kim, approached him at the barracks. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, I'm fine," Jungkook replied with a weak smile. "Lieutenant Han is strict, but trust me, he only wants you to get better. Don't let the punishment demoralize you." Sergeant Kim's words were an encouragement to Jungkook. In the days that followed, he worked hard to correct his mistakes. He began to learn more about tactics and strategy, asked his seniors often, and trained himself to be more disciplined. A month later, the Tactics Division held a massive simulation involving all members. This time, Jungkook was appointed as the team leader. With all the lessons he had learned, Jungkook led his team confidently and successfully completed the mission without a single mistake.